San Francisco is quietly undergoing its biggest rezoning in 50 years, and barely anyone is paying attention to it. But this isn't just policy talk. It's about where you'll live, what you'll pay, and how this city will look for decades. With 82,000 new homes required by 2031, the pressure's on, and the map is being redrawn in real time. Today, I'm breaking down what's changing, where it's happening, and how it could flip the housing market upside down. Hi, I'm Kinsey Linton, your Bay Area real estate guide. Let's talk about who should be paying attention to San Francisco's rezoning plans. Are you a homeowner in Richmond worried about changes to your neighborhood? A renter in the Sunset hoping for more housing options? Maybe you own a small business on one of the commercial streets that could be totally reshaped. Wherever you fit in, I'm here to give you the real story on what's coming. And here's something most people don't realize. Neighborhoods like the Sunset in Richmond, they've barely changed in decades. Meanwhile, areas like Soma and Mission Bay have taken on almost all of the city's growth. That's about to shift, and the impact on housing, equity, and neighborhood character could be major. Let's start with what's driving all of this, the housing crisis and the state's mandate to build. Now, San Francisco's housing crisis didn't just pop up overnight. We're looking at decades where housing construction just couldn't keep up with jobs and population. During the tech boom, the Bay Area added hundreds of thousands of jobs, but barely built enough housing to keep up. No surprise, housing costs skyrocketed. But here's what makes things different now. California has basically told San Francisco, you need to plan for 82,000 new homes by 2031. That's what they call the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or the RHNA. And get this, it's nearly 3 times higher than what was required last time around. The city is specifically short by 36,200 units that have to come from rezoning. The deadline is no joke. San Francisco has to adopt a compliant rezoning plan by January 31st, 2026. And if they miss it, they lose millions in state funding, lose local control over housing approvals, and might trigger what's called the builder's remedy. That would let developers basically ignore local zoning for projects and affordable housing. Pretty serious stuff. Take a look at where housing's been built in SF over the past 15 years. About 90% has been concentrated in eastern neighborhoods, Soma, Mission Bay, Dogpatch. Meanwhile, western and northern parts, which make up over half of SF's residential land, have barely seen any new housing. These neighborhoods have barely changed since the 70s, which brings us to some important history which we'll get into in just a second. But before we go any further, if you're here learning about rezoning in San Francisco, chances are you're into this kind of content. So go ahead and subscribe to our channel to keep up with more videos on Bay Area real estate, new developments, and insights that matter to you. All right, to get why this rezoning is such a big deal, we need to look back at decisions made decades ago that shaped where housing could and couldn't be built. The big moment came in 1978. San Francisco went through this massive downzoning effort that seriously restricted multifamily housing, especially in western and northern neighborhoods. The result? Almost all new housing since then has been packed into eastern neighborhoods, creating this huge divide in development. But that 1978 downzoning didn't happen in a vacuum. It came during a time when lots of middle and upper income households, mostly white, were moving to the suburbs. Back then, the region was building way more housing than today, and housing costs weren't so crazy compared to what people earned. Here's something wild that most people don't know. Those zoning changes that blocked multifamily housing, they basically institutionalized racial and social exclusion in SF's wealthier, predominantly white neighborhoods. Urban planners today call this exclusionary zoning, policies that don't explicitly mention race but end up perpetuating segregation. These areas are mostly zoned for single-family homes, which, let's face it, aren't exactly affordable to regular folks. And that brings us to this crucial connection between housing and equity. The concentration of development in eastern neighborhoods hasn't just changed how the city looks, it's reinforced patterns of economic and racial segregation. And that's exactly what this rezoning plan is trying to fix. So what's actually in the plan? Let's break down what could be coming to your neighborhood, like buildings 6 to 8 times taller than what there is now. So what's the city actually proposing? They're calling it expanding housing choice, though Mayor Lurie sometimes calls it family zoning. Whatever the name, it's the biggest change to SF's zoning since that 1978 downzoning we just talked about. The plan focuses on allowing more housing in neighborhoods with good access to opportunities and services, places with solid public transit, parks, shops, and community facilities. And guess where those areas are? Mostly in northern and western parts of the city. Drive through these neighborhoods today and what do you see? Mostly low-rise buildings, especially along major transit routes. Under the rezoning plan, these areas could change dramatically. Major east-west commercial streets like California, Clement, and Balboa would allow 65-foot buildings about 6 stories. And bigger thoroughfares like Geary Boulevard, Taraval, and Judah, They'd permit buildings up to 85 feet, about 8 stories tall. But there's something flying under the radar. Certain key spots would see even bigger height allowances. Properties around Lombard Street and Van Ness Avenue could go up to 140 feet tall. Turn a corner into the marina and Cow Hollow, and you'd find much denser development possibilities, with 6-story buildings on Chestnut Street and 8-story buildings on Lombard. The plan isn't just about height. It also includes what planners call density decontrol in high opportunity areas. Basically, this removes limits on how many housing units you can put in a building of a certain size. So a building that might currently be limited to 3 units could potentially fit 6, 8, or more units within the same exterior dimensions. Another cool element is promoting missing middle housing outside the major corridors. It's housing types between single-family homes and larger apartment buildings, duplexes, fourplexes, townhouses, and small apartment buildings. These were super common in American cities before the mid-20th century, but got zoned out of existence in many neighborhoods. Now, something important to remember, this rezoning wouldn't happen overnight. Development would happen gradually, driven by market forces and individual property owners making decisions. Nobody's forcing homeowners to sell or redevelop. The plan just creates new possibilities in areas that have seen minimal change for decades. But you might be wondering, is this just about adding more housing units, or is there something deeper going on? There absolutely is. In fact, there's an equity and inclusion agenda behind this plan that might surprise you. All right, let me break down why this matters so much. Throughout history, communities of color have been targeted by policies that segregated neighborhoods, displaced residents, and stripped wealth from the communities. In San Francisco, like many American cities, practices like redlining, racially restrictive covenants, and urban renewal had huge impacts on where people could live. What's wild is how these historical practices still shape our city today. Look at SF's demographic patterns, and you'll see northern and western neighborhoods, the ones mostly resistant to new housing, are predominantly white and high income. Meanwhile, communities of color have been concentrated in eastern and southern neighborhoods, which have absorbed most new development and felt the most displacement pressure. The Housing Element 2022, which guides the city's housing policies through 2030, puts racial and social equity front and center for the first time ever. The rezoning plan aims to implement this vision by creating housing opportunities in neighborhoods that have historically kept out lower income residents and communities of color. One specific goal is putting 25 to 50% of new permanently affordable housing in what planners call well-resourced neighborhoods. These are places with good schools, parks, transit, and other amenities that help people, especially families with kids, thrive. But let's be real, just allowing more housing doesn't automatically create affordability or inclusion. That's why the plan includes specific requirements for affordable units in new developments, and why the city's developing tenant protections alongside the rezoning effort. The city calls this approach affirmatively furthering fair housing, actively promoting diverse, inclusive communities, and addressing patterns of segregation. It's about creating a city where everyone has access to great neighborhoods, not just those who can afford million-dollar single-family homes. I've talked with families who'd love to live in Richmond or Sunset for the excellent schools and parks, but just can't afford the limited housing options there. This rezoning could change that reality for a lot of San Franciscans. Now, how will all of this actually happen? The implementation timeline is tighter than most people realize, and the city's already behind schedule. Coming up next, I'll walk you through exactly what has to happen before that critical 2026 deadline. The city has a firm deadline for this rezoning plan, but getting there involves a pretty complex process with multiple players and chances for public input. Here's a timeline we're looking at. San Francisco must adopt a compliant rezoning plan by January 31st, 2026. Working backward, the planning department's been developing proposals and gathering community feedback throughout 2023 and 2024. They're expected to issue a new proposed zoning map in early 2025, followed by public hearings and the legislative adoption process. The Planning Commission needs to review and approve the plan before it hits the Board of Supervisors. According to Senator Scott Weiner, the board must pass the rezoning proposal by the end of 2025 to meet the state deadline. But there's more happening alongside the rezoning effort. The planning department is developing what they call objective design standards to complement the planning code. These standards will provide clear, non-subjective criteria for evaluating housing projects once the new zoning is in place. This matters because under California law, local jurisdictions can't use subjective judgment to deny housing projects. They can only evaluate projects against objective standards, rules that don't involve personal opinions and can be uniformly verified. The level of community engagement around this process is pretty impressive. The planning department has been doing tons of outreach, holding informational hearings, and meeting with neighborhood organizations. They're even offering to join neighborhood group meetings to provide presentations and answer questions. I've been to several of these meetings, and the conversations get intense, but they're productive. People really care about their neighborhoods and want to make sure any changes respect community character while also addressing housing needs. This back and forth is crucial for developing a plan that works for everyone. And not everyone's on board with these changes. Some community groups are pushing back hard against parts of the plan. Let's take a look at what people in the community are saying. As you'd expect with any major change to the city, opinions on the rezoning plan are all over the map. Housing advocates like WIMBY Action have been pushing for zoning reform for years. They see the rezoning plan as a long overdue correction to decades of underbuilding. In their view, the housing shortage is the root cause of the affordability crisis, and building more housing is essential to fixing it. On the flip side, neighborhood groups like Neighborhoods United SF have serious concerns about the proposed changes. They worry about impacts on the neighborhood character, traffic congestion, parking, and whether infrastructure can handle growth. Some residents have lived in these neighborhoods for decades and fear that dramatic changes could undermine what makes their community special. Meanwhile, small business owners along commercial corridors have mixed feelings. Some see potential benefits from more customers and increased foot traffic, while others worry about construction disruption and getting priced out if commercial rents rise along residential ones. Tenant advocates are raising important questions about displacement risks. While the rezoning focuses on areas that haven't seen much development, there's legitimate concern that speculative pressure could lead to evictions or rent increases in nearby areas. The planning department is working on the tenant protections to address these concerns, but the details are still being hammered out. I've talked with residents across the city about this plan, and it's fascinating how complex the emotions are. A homeowner in the Sunset told me she's worried about parking and privacy if 6-story buildings pop up on her block. A renter in the Mission hopes more housing in Western neighborhoods might reduce development pressure in his community. A small business owner on Geary sees potential opportunity, but worries about surviving construction if her building gets redeveloped. What's clear from these conversations is that there are no simple answers. The rezoning involves real trade-offs and competing values. The challenge for the city leaders is balancing these legitimate concerns while meeting the urgent need for more housing and addressing historical inequities. But let's set the debate aside for a moment. What would San Francisco actually look like if this plan goes through? I'll show you some eye-opening projections, including which neighborhoods could change the most and what big impact almost no one's talking about. So if this plan goes through, how might it actually reshape San Francisco? Let's explore what could happen with housing production, neighborhood changes, demographics, and infrastructure. For housing production, the plan could theoretically unlock development capacity for hundreds of thousands of new units. But in reality, actual development will happen gradually, driven by market conditions, construction costs, and property owner decisions. We're looking at thousands of new developments built over many years, not some overnight transformation. Neighborhood changes would likely start along key transit corridors, where mid-rise apartment buildings would gradually replace older 1- and 2-story structures. These changes would happen incrementally as property owners decide to sell or redevelop. Areas around major intersections and transit stops would probably see development first. Then, changes would spread along commercial corridors. One of the biggest potential impacts is on who lives where. By creating more housing options in historically exclusive neighborhoods, the rezoning could lead to more economically and racially diverse communities. Families who currently can't afford these areas might gain access to their high-quality schools, parks, and other amenities. This could help address the city's stark patterns of segregation. But with growth comes infrastructure needs. More housing means more demand for transportation, schools, parks, water, sewer, and other utilities. The city's approach involves coordination among various departments to make sure infrastructure planning keeps pace with housing growth. The planning department is working with agencies like SFMTA for transportation and SFUSD for schools and others to plan for gradually enhancing community facilities. Worth noting that new housing also generates property tax revenue that can help fund these infrastructure improvements. Plus, new developments often include impact fees or community benefits that support public amenities. For individual property owners, the rezoning could boost property values due to new development potential. For existing renters, the impacts largely depend on tenant protections and how effectively they're implemented. For neighborhoods as a whole, the community will evolve gradually rather than change overnight. Now, what's interesting is that some of the most significant changes might be subtle, not in building heights, but in who gets to live in these neighborhoods. A more diverse mix of residents could bring new energy, businesses, and perspectives to areas that have seen little change for decades. Whether you're for or against the rezoning, there are ways to make your voice heard. Let me show you how to get involved, including insider tips on which parts of the plans are most open to public input right now. The city's gathering feedback and working toward finalizing the plan. The next year will be crucial for determining San Francisco's future development patterns, and there are tons of ways for residents to get involved. Want to engage with the process? The Planning Department is holding ongoing hearings and community meetings. Last February, there was a Planning Commission presentation focused on tenant protections, replacement units, and tenant rights. These sessions are a great opportunity to learn more and share your thoughts. The Planning Department also offers community conversations, where they'll join neighborhood group meetings to provide presentations, answer questions, and discuss concerns. You can email them at sf.housing.choice@sfgov.org to schedule a conversation for your neighborhood group. If you're more of a digital person, the Planning Department's website has regular updates, including meeting schedules, presentation materials, and FAQs about the rezoning effort. You can also sign up for their newsletter to get notifications about upcoming events. What really matters during this process is informed engagement. Take time to understand what's being proposed, think about both potential benefits and challenges, and share specific feedback rather than just say, I love it or I hate it. The most helpful input addresses particular aspects of the plan with constructive suggestions. Remember, this rezoning is required by state law. The question isn't whether San Francisco will change its zoning, but how. By getting involved, you can help shape a plan that addresses housing needs while respecting neighborhood character and addressing community concerns. As we wrap up this deep dive into San Francisco's rezoning initiative, let's pull back and look at the big picture. What does this moment really mean for the future of the city? SF's rezoning marks a major shift in how the city handles housing and development. It could make the city more inclusive and affordable while preserving its unique neighborhoods. Today, we've covered everything from the historical decisions shaping SF's housing to the proposed rezoning and its potential impact. This is a pivotal moment for the city's future. The decisions made in the next year will shape SF for generations, affecting who lives where, how diverse our communities are, and whether the city can stay unique while becoming more accessible to people of all backgrounds and incomes. At its core, the rezoning effort is about creating a San Francisco that works for everyone, not just those who can afford million-dollar homes. It's about addressing the legacy of exclusive zoning and making concrete steps towards equality. Change isn't easy, especially in a city with such distinctive neighborhoods. But thoughtful change can make San Francisco even more vibrant, diverse, and sustainable in the years ahead. If you'd like more information on how to get involved or want to discuss anything related to the housing market in SF and the Bay Area, I'd love to help. Just reach out by emailing me at kinsey@theownteam.com or find my full contact information in the description below. Thanks, and see you soon.